Get ready for a nail-biting tale of small-town courage and high-stakes danger. In this explosive story, a group of ruthless bikers storms into a peaceful Texas community, only to discover that the quiet waitress they've been harassing is actually a retired Delta Force operative. The tension peaks when she joins forces with a handful of allies to infiltrate the gang's heavily guarded warehouse, where they uncover a lethal cache of weapons and contraband. Each twist and turn brings you closer to an unforgettable showdown that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Will our determined heroine bring the bikers to justice and restore tranquility to the town? Or will the gang's reign of terror prevail? Stay with us through every pulse-pounding moment to find out. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue delivering more exciting stories like this one. The early morning sun cast long shadows on the cracked asphalt of Highway 281 as it wound through the flat Texas plains. Here, in a region mostly forgotten by the hustle of the big cities, stood a small roadside diner called Dixie's Haven. It was the sort of place weary truckers and local farmhands visited for a warm meal and a dose of old-fashioned Southern hospitality. A large neon sign perched precariously above the entrance, flickering intermittently, beckoning folks to stop by. Inside, the laminated menus boasted hearty breakfast, strong coffee, and a selection of classic Southern comfort food. The smell of bacon grease and burnt toast lingered in the air, merging with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee to welcome in the dawn of a new day. Lucy Garrington, a lean woman in her early 40s, was busy wiping the long Formica counter with practiced efficiency. She wore a simple uniform, faded blue jeans, and a checkered shirt beneath an apron embroidered with the diner's name. At first glance, she seemed like any other small-town waitress, polite, unobtrusive, and eager to serve, but her hazel eyes betrayed a keen sharpness, scanning every corner of the room for any sign of trouble. Beneath her relatively nondescript appearance lay a formidable past. Lucy was a retired Delta Force operative, though you wouldn't know unless you noticed the faint scars on her forearms or the firm, confident way she carried herself. She kept her blonde hair tied back in a simple ponytail, and she rarely spoke of her military background. For her, Dixie's Haven was a place to find some semblance of peace after years of turbulent missions across the globe. From behind the counter, Lucy greeted the regulars by name: ranchers with sunburnt faces, local truckers who stopped in nightly, and a handful of traveling salesmen just passing through. The conversations were always about livestock prices, the unpredictable Texas weather, or the small gossip that spread like wildfire in rural communities. Over time, Lucy had come to appreciate the slow, predictable rhythm of these folks' lives. She had seen enough unpredictability and danger in her past work, so the monotony of waitressing was soothing, almost meditative. But the tranquility of that morning was punctured by a low, throaty rumble that grew louder outside. The unmistakable sound of motorcycle engines signaled new arrivals, ones who clearly weren't the typical polite regulars. As the roar reached the diner, Lucy's sharp instincts flared awake. She set aside the rags she'd been using to wipe the counter and cast a measured glance out the large front windows. A group of 5 bikers in dusty leather jackets pulled up in a haze of exhaust fumes and tire crunch. Their presence seemed to press against the atmosphere, a hint of menace swirling in the air. While it wasn't entirely uncommon for bikers to pass through, something about this group made Lucy's senses prickle. She inhaled slowly, reminding herself of her decision to maintain a low profile. Despite her attempts to blend into the background, Lucy was no stranger to confrontation. She had lived through firefights in deserts halfway around the world. She had stared down threats far more intimidating than a band of rowdy bikers. Nonetheless, a small part of her felt uneasy. She could tell, just by their swagger and too casual smirks, that these men weren't here for a friendly slice of pie. Quietly, Lucy busied herself with plates and cups, resolving to keep a watchful eye on how this might unfold. The door slammed open with a harsh jangle of the tiny bell overhead. One by one, the bikers filed in, the scrape of their heavy boots loud against the diner's worn linoleum. The leader, a burly, tattooed man wearing a faded leather vest emblazoned with the emblem of a scorpion, swept off his helmet and surveyed the place like he owned it. His cold eyes flickered over the few customers in the diner, clearly searching for signs of fear or intimidation. Distantly, country music crooned from an old jukebox in the corner, but the sudden silence among the patrons practically drowned out the tune. Lucy felt the shift in tension. Her heart rate remained steady, thanks to years of discipline, but she knew to be extra cautious. She gave the bikers a polite smile, raising an eyebrow as if to say, "Morning, fellas. What can I do for you?" But the men didn't smile back. Instead, one of them, a wiry figure with stringy hair, spat loudly on the floor. Lucy's jaw tightened ever so slightly, but she kept her composure, stepping forward from behind the counter to greet them. "Help you with anything?" she asked, her voice even, carefully devoid of any challenge. She recognized how quickly hostility could escalate if she misread the situation. In her previous line of work, diffusing tension was sometimes as valuable as stealth or marksmanship. She didn't expect them to be polite, but she also wasn't about to roll out a welcome mat for intimidation. "Coffee," growled the leader, hooking a thumb at his men. "And something hot to eat. We've been on the road all night. Make it fast." His words carried a barely masked threat, as if speed were more important than courtesy. Still, Lucy only nodded. There was no sense in aggravating them unnecessarily. She motioned to a booth in the corner near the windows. They took their seats, sprawling themselves with an air of ownership that made the other customers shrink back into their chairs. A pair of older ranchers, who usually joked around with Lucy every morning, exchanged uneasy glances and focused intently on their half-eaten breakfasts. One of the truckers at the counter looked like he was weighing his options: intervene or keep quiet. Sensing that Lucy had the situation under control, he took a nervous sip of coffee and kept his eyes on the swirl of cream in his mug. Lucy walked toward the kitchen, handing the order to cook, a heavy-set man named Raymond, who'd seen his fair share of rough customers in his time. "These guys look like they might be trouble," Lucy said under her breath, her back to the swinging door. Raymond frowned, glancing over his shoulder through the small round window in the door. The bikers were huddled around their table, talking in low voices. One of them punched another's shoulder in jest, but the gesture carried a certain edge that only the very observant would catch. Shaking off her momentary unease, Lucy returned to the dining area with a pot of coffee. As she approached the group, she told herself to keep calm. Whatever these bikers were up to, she'd handle it. She poured coffee into each of their mugs, ignoring their leering stares. They eyed her from head to toe, and Lucy sensed that they were testing her boundaries, seeing if they could rattle her. So she kept her face neutral, her posture relaxed, but her mind was already mapping the diner, identifying exits and potential vantage points. The watchers never realized that Lucy's calm exterior was merely the tip of a far deeper reservoir of skill and readiness. Outside, the relentless Texas sun was already turning the morning heat oppressive, baking the diner's thin walls and intensifying the smell of asphalt in the parking lot. A thin haze shimmered on the horizon, blending the road into mirage-like waves. Normally, Lucy would be working through the breakfast rush, chatting amicably with regulars and making sure coffee cups stayed filled. This day, however, was different. The tension introduced by the bikers weighed on everyone, and Lucy felt a subtle shift in the diner's atmosphere, as though the place itself was holding its breath. Across the room, the leader, whose name Lucy later learned was Cage, tapped impatiently on the table. His fingers sported thick, silver rings shaped like skulls, and every tap against the chipped formica seemed like a small, menacing challenge. Occasionally, he'd throw a glance at Lucy, smirking as if to say, "I dare you to defy me." She noted the distinctive patch on his vest again, a scorpion coiled around a flaming wheel. It wasn't a symbol she recognized from her quick mental database of known biker gangs in the region, but that didn't mean they weren't dangerous. Small clubs sometimes tried to carve out territory, and intimidation was often their first step in testing the local waters. As Lucy set out silverware and napkins for them, she heard one of the men, stockier with a salt and pepper beard, mutter something about looking for a new spot and pushing out the old-timers. Another chimed in about this place being ripe for the picking. Their voices were low, but Lucy's hearing was honed from years of intelligence gathering under dire circumstances. Piece by piece, she started to form a picture. These men weren't just passing through. They might be scouting for territory or resources, or maybe they were running from someone else and needed a new hideout. Either way, the diner and the surrounding area, small ranches, wide open roads, and minimal law enforcement presence could seem like easy pickings to a group looking to set up shop. Suddenly, the one with the wiry hair, who had spat on the floor earlier, grabbed Lucy's wrist as she was about to pour more coffee. "Hey," he said, voice low and thick with arrogance. "Why don't you sit here a while? Keep us company." His grip was firm, and he seemed to take pleasure in the subtle gasp from one of the older customers in the next booth. Lucy didn't flinch. She simply turned her gaze to his hand, eyebrows lifting as if to calmly say, "Remove it, or I will." He held on for a second longer, testing her reaction. When she remained utterly still, not a trace of fear in her eyes, he let go with a sneer. Raymond, watching through the pass window from the kitchen, stiffened. If Lucy had given any sign she needed help, he would have burst out swinging his heavy ladle like a mace. But Lucy gave a small nod, silently telling him to stay back. She had faced far worse men than these. The more she observed them, the more she saw their cockiness stemmed from a place of insecurity, as if they needed to prove themselves. For Lucy, that was a classic hallmark of a group that might escalate if challenged too openly. So she continued her subdued approach, finishing refilling their cups without saying a word. The confrontation was only beginning, and Lucy's instincts whispered that this was more than a single random act of harassment. Life in a quiet Texan diner might have lulled some into a sense of complacency, but Lucy's days of training and field experience had never truly left her. She was ready, if it came to it, to turn the tables. When their food arrived, a platter of eggs, bacon, and toast that Raymond had prepared with visible annoyance, the group tore into it ravenously. The tension around them intensified with each mouthful as though they were feeding on more than just breakfast. Lucy, from her station behind the counter, carefully watched each move. She cataloged which one seemed to hold the most authority, Cage, definitely, who was the muscle, the salt and pepper bearded biker, and who seemed most impulsive, the wiry guy with quick hands. Between bites, they continued their hushed conversation. Lucy could make out fragments, something about push our luck and drive them out. She suspected they were discussing the local community, perhaps planning to intimidate landowners or small business owners into some kind of protection racket. It was a scenario Lucy had encountered in her past: armed insurgents in foreign villages who would strong-arm the locals into submission before establishing a foothold. The parallels weren't lost on her, but she also recognized a key difference. She was here now, and she was no stranger to safeguarding vulnerable communities. One of the ranchers, a grizzled man named Earl, finally worked up the courage to leave. He set a few bills on his table and gave Lucy a terse nod, mouthing the words, "Be careful." Then he hurried out, trying his best not to draw the biker's attention. Lucy watched him go, feeling a pang of concern for the man. Earl lived not too far from the diner, and if these bikers spread out into the area, people like him could easily become targets. But she also knew that blatant confrontation at this early stage might endanger the others in the diner. As Lucy gathered empty plates from a nearby table, she glanced over at Cage. He was leaning back, arms stretched out over the top of the booth, exuding an arrogant confidence. With a slow, deliberate motion, he looked around at the room. The older trucker at the counter kept his head down, and the couple in the corner booth whispered anxiously to each other, unsure whether to leave or stay. Even the jukebox's music seemed subdued, as if it were aware of the tension. Suddenly, Cage stood up. He walked around the diner, running his hand along the counters and the backs of booths, making a show of surveying the establishment. His men smirked, apparently amused by their leader's display of dominance. Eventually, Cage stopped at a dusty bulletin board near the restrooms, plastered with local ads for farm equipment and missing dog posters. He tore one flyer off, looked it over, and then chuckled before crumpling it up and tossing it carelessly on the floor. The message was clear: your rules, your norms, your community announcements, none of that matters to us. Lucy clenched her jaw but said nothing, mindful that a single spark could ignite a far bigger fire. Returning to their booth, Cage finally locked eyes with Lucy. "Hey, sweetheart," he called. "We got some business in town we're going to stick around for. We'll probably be back here a lot. Best get used to us." There was a menacing undertone in his voice that made the hair on the back of Lucy's neck stand on end. She forced a polite smile, nodding as though she didn't sense the threat behind his words. In truth, she was already thinking several steps ahead. If these men intended to make trouble for the town, she might have to take action far sooner than she ever wanted to. After finishing their meal and leaving a pitiful tip that felt more like an insult, the bikers filed out, helmets in hand. They revved their engines in the parking lot, letting the thunderous roar echo across the dusty plains. Lucy peered through the window, watching as they disappeared down the highway in a haze of exhaust. The tension they had brought lingered, a dark cloud that hadn't quite cleared despite their departure. For a few moments, nobody spoke. The other customers exhaled in relief, some shaking their heads or muttering under their breath about no-good troublemakers. The older trucker at the counter turned to Lucy. "You all right, miss?" he asked, concern filling his eyes. Lucy nodded, forcing a small smile. There was no point in alarming them more than they already were. Raymond emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a towel. "We need to tell the sheriff," he said, his deep voice resonating with a worry. "Those fellas have bad news written all over them." Lucy agreed, though she suspected the sheriff's resources were stretched thin. In small towns like this, law enforcement was often just one or two deputies and a single cruiser. If the bikers were as serious a threat as she sensed, it would take more than a stern talking to from local law enforcement to deter them. Still, Lucy believed in following protocol. She picked up the phone behind the counter and dialed the sheriff's office. The line rang several times before a receptionist answered. Lucy relayed the basics. A group of 5 bikers had rolled in, harassed the patrons, and hinted at business in town that sounded suspicious. The receptionist listened sympathetically, but explained that the sheriff was currently out handling a dispute involving cattle theft. Lucy left her contact information, urging the office to get back to her as soon as they could. Once she hung up, she caught Raymond's eye. "We might have to handle this ourselves if they come back," she said in a low voice. Raymond just nodded grimly. Despite the looming worry, Lucy had a job to do. She spent the next hour cleaning up, refilling salt shakers, and tidying the booths. She went about these tasks methodically, but her mind buzzed with questions. How big is their group? Are they just a small splinter gang or part of something larger? Will they target the diner specifically or the whole county? Each question led to potential strategies because Lucy knew, if it came down to it, she could defend herself and those around her. She had done it before, in far-flung corners of the world. By midday, the lunch crowd began trickling in, unaware of the morning's confrontation. Lucy forced herself to greet them with the same warmth and care, but a weight pressed on her chest. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was sitting on a powder keg. In all her time since leaving the military, Lucy had sought a life devoid of the violence that once consumed her days. She had found solace in the quiet roads and unassuming communities of rural Texas. But trouble had a way of finding her, no matter how carefully she tried to hide her past. And if these bikers planned to claim this area as their own, Lucy might be forced to reveal just how wrong they were to underestimate a waitress who had once been among the Army's most elite special operations soldiers. Over the next few days, a palpable unease settled into the diner. Regulars chatted about sightings of the bikers in different parts of town, loitering outside the local gas station, lingering near the feed store, even rolling through the quiet residential streets at odd hours. Some folks suspected they were looking for easy marks, scouting out properties that could be extorted or robbed. Rumors swirled that they had already approached a local farmer about protection fees, though the farmer refused to talk openly about it. Lucy listened to these whispers intently, her mind piecing together the puzzle. The sheriff finally arrived one afternoon, just as Lucy was about to finish her shift. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man named Jared Hopkins, with a dusting of gray at his temples and deep lines around his eyes that spoke of long hours and limited resources. He pulled Lucy aside for a quiet conversation, apologizing for the delay. "We've been running ragged," he admitted. "Cattle theft has spiked, and we only have so many deputies." Lucy understood, but she pressed him about the bikers, explaining their harassment of diners and locals. The sheriff's brow creased. "We're aware of them," he said, "but they haven't done anything outright illegal yet. If you hear about or see concrete evidence of criminal activity, let us know. But so far, it's just intimidation and rumor." Lucy nodded, knowing that by the time something truly illegal happened, it might be too late for the victims. She considered telling him more about her own capabilities, her background in Delta Force. But old habits of secrecy died hard, and she wasn't sure how the sheriff would react. Instead, she just emphasized that the community felt threatened. She asked if she could rely on a quick response in case these men turned violent. The sheriff assured her that he'd do his best, though they were spread thin. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm orange glow across the parking lot, Lucy stepped outside to take in a breath of the cooling evening air. She looked across the barren fields, her keen eyes sweeping over the darkening road. Just then, in the distance, she caught a glimpse of headlights, motorcycle headlights. She tensed, waiting to see if they would pass by or turn in. The engines grew louder, and indeed, 3 bikes emerged, rolling slowly toward the diner. This time, Lucy's heart pounded just a little faster. 3 wasn't the full group of 5, but it was enough to signal that the trouble was far from over. They parked, cut the engines, and strolled in with the same cocky swagger. Tonight, the diner was nearly empty, only Raymond in the kitchen and one older woman sipping tea at a corner table. Lucy braced herself as they entered. One of them, a tall, lanky man with a shaved head, sneered at her. "I heard the coffee here is nice," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Another gave a lazy half-laugh. They clearly weren't here just for coffee. Instead of immediately confronting them, Lucy maintained her role. She offered menus, asked if they wanted dinner. The tall biker stared at her with a strange intensity. "We want more than dinner, honey," he said. "We're looking to expand. You wouldn't happen to know who owns this fine establishment, would you?" Lucy met his gaze, steel in her eyes. "That'd be Ms. Dixie," she replied calmly. "But she's not around right now. You can leave her a message." The man snorted, leaning in closer. "Oh, we will. In fact, we might leave more than just a message." Lucy felt her hand clench around the notepad she held, forcing herself to remain poised. She knew a threat when she heard one, and this was as clear as day. The bikers made themselves comfortable, choosing a booth close to the entrance. Their leather creaked as they sat, the smell of cigarettes and stale sweat following them. One started flipping through the jukebox selection, eventually landing on a track that blared gritty southern rock. The music filled the diner, and the older woman in the corner quietly stood to leave, casting Lucy a sympathetic look before slipping out. Now Lucy was alone with Raymond and 3 men who clearly had no intention of playing nice. Lucy served them water, her every movement deliberate. She noted their tattoos, symbols she didn't fully recognize, but which likely held meaning to them. She also noticed they wore the same scorpion patch on their vests, confirming they were part of Cage's group. The lanky man who had asked about the diner's ownership tapped a finger on the table impatiently, as though waiting for Lucy to reappear with food. But she knew better than to let them control the pace entirely. She delivered a couple of menus and then stood at a respectful distance, forcing them to initiate conversation if they wanted it. After some muttered debate, they placed an order for burgers and fries, but Lucy suspected they weren't here to eat. Sure enough, when she passed the order to Raymond, the lanky man beckoned her closer with a curl of his finger. "We've been hearing a lot about this area," he said. "Seems like there's plenty of potential. Wide open spaces, not too many cops, and a bunch of farmers who might need some protection. Know what I mean?" He smirked, revealing yellowed teeth. Lucy remained impassive, but her mind whirled at the brazenness of their intentions. "And if the locals don't want your protection?" she asked softly. The man's smirk grew wider. "Then maybe some unfortunate accidents happen. Barns catch fire, equipment goes missing. Even waitresses can get roughed up in the parking lot. But that's not what we want, see? We'd prefer if everyone cooperated." The threat hung in the air, thick as the grease from the deep fryer. Lucy's grip tightened on the edge of the table, but she forced herself to stay calm. She realized that if she showed too much defiance now, they'd sense a challenge, and the violence could escalate before she had a proper plan. There were too many innocents in town to consider. "Well," she said evenly, "I can't speak for everyone else. They're free to decide what's best for themselves." The biker leaned back, draping his arm across the booth's backrest. "That's where you come in, sugar. You get to spread the word. Tell this Ms. Dixie, tell your neighbors. Either pay up or face the consequences." Raymond peeked out from the kitchen, his worried eyes meeting Lucy's. She gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod, signaling that she had this under control. Inside, however, she felt the fire of her old training flare. She'd once been on the front lines of some of the world's most dangerous missions, extracting hostages and dismantling insurgent cells. A ragtag group of bullies might not measure up to the militants she'd faced, but underestimating any enemy was a mistake she'd never make. She had to play this carefully, biding her time until she could figure out exactly how large this biker gang was and how best to neutralize them, without putting innocent people in the crosshairs. After they ate, making a show of leaving behind a mess of half-eaten fries and spilled soda, the bikers swaggered out, their laughter echoing ominously. Lucy breathed a silent sigh of relief when the last of their motorcycles roared away into the night. But the respite was bitter, as she knew they'd return. Locking the diner's door behind them, Lucy turned to Raymond, who was busy wiping down the now empty booth. "You sure you're okay?" he asked, his voice low. Lucy gave a firm nod. "Yeah, I'm fine, but we have a problem. They're not going to let this go." Raymond cursed under his breath. "It ain't right, them coming here and acting like they own the place. Miss Dixie won't stand for it either." Lucy couldn't help but smile at the mention of Dixie, the elderly woman who owned the diner. She was feisty and no stranger to speaking her mind, but Lucy worried that such open defiance might provoke these bikers more than deter them. That night, Lucy stayed late to close up. She double-checked the locks on all doors and windows. She wasn't taking any chances. As she walked to her truck, a sturdy old pickup with peeling paint, she cast a long glance at the empty highway. The hum of cicadas surrounded her, and stars littered the vast Texan sky, yet she found no comfort in the beauty of the evening. Instead, she felt a rising sense of vigilance, like she was stepping back into her old life, where danger lurked around every corner. Before heading home, Lucy made a quiet detour down one of the remote back roads. She parked by a dilapidated barn, a structure she had purchased secretly a few months ago for extra storage. There, hidden away beneath dusty tarps, lay some of her old gear. A locked trunk contained a variety of tools, night vision goggles, tactical knives, even a dismantled rifle. She hadn't touched these items in quite some time, hoping she'd never have to use them again. But if these bikers were planning a full-scale intimidation campaign, Lucy needed to be prepared. She ran her hand over the locked trunk, recalling the missions that once made such equipment an extension of her daily life. With a heavy heart, she decided to leave the trunk locked, for now. But knowing it was there gave her a small sense of readiness she might soon need. When Lucy finally made it home, a modest trailer on the outskirts of town, she was greeted by the quiet hum of an overhead fan and the familiar sense of solitude. She warmed up a quick meal and thought about calling an old friend from her military days. "Stay off the grid," she reminded herself. She wasn't sure if reassembling her old network would help or just draw more scrutiny. After all, she had left that life behind for a reason, the promise of peace, even if it was a fragile one. Yet, as she tried to sleep, her mind kept drifting back to the diner and the looks on those bikers' faces. This wasn't a fleeting threat. It was something that could poison the entire community. She tossed and turned, knowing that morning would bring fresh uncertainty. But one thing was clear. If the scorpion emblazoned gang thought they'd found an easy mark, they had no idea they were dealing with someone who could dismantle them piece by piece if pushed. Over the next week, the bikers continued their covert intimidation campaign around town. Lucy heard whispers of farmers being approached at their gates and told to pay maintenance fees to keep their equipment safe. The local grocery store clerk mentioned two bikers lurking in the parking lot, asking pointed questions about when shipments arrived. Even the local bar, the Rusted Spur, experienced an incident where a couple of these men cornered the bartender and hinted that new ownership might be taking an interest in the place. Lucy watched the tension escalate like a coiled spring ready to snap. She spent her days serving customers, her nights patrolling the edges of the diner's parking lot, double-checking that everything was locked up. Despite the sense of impending danger, most of the townsfolk tried to maintain a semblance of normal life. That's how small towns worked. You did your chores, tended your fields, and hoped trouble would pass you by. But Lucy knew better than to rely on hope alone. Late one evening after closing, she met with Ms. Dixie to discuss the situation. The older woman was fiercely protective of her diner, having opened it decades ago with her late husband. In her 60s, Dixie was no stranger to confrontation, but the bikers' brand of organized threats was new territory. "I won't be bullied," she said, her voice trembling, not with fear, but with anger. "This place is my life's work. They've got another thing coming if they think I'll just hand over my hard-earned money." Lucy respected that spirit, but she also worried about how quickly violence could flare if Dixie openly defied them. "We might need to prepare for the worst," Lucy advised gently, choosing her words carefully. She didn't want to frighten the woman. "They've been targeting other businesses. Yours could be next, especially since it's a central hub in town." Dixie sniffed, setting her hands on her ample hips. "Well, I'm not about to roll out the welcome mat. If they want to break in here, they'll find me waiting." Lucy couldn't help but smile at her bravery, but the memory of insurgent raids flashed through her mind. Bravado was admirable, but it wouldn't stop a determined assault. That night, Lucy stayed late once more, helping Dixie bolster the diner's defenses, replacing flimsy locks, adding a few wooden beams to reinforce windows, even setting up a basic motion sensor by the back entrance. It felt makeshift, but it was better than nothing. As they worked, Lucy's thoughts kept drifting to her old Delta Force team. In situations like this, she would have had a highly trained squad at her back, specialized gear, and a network of intelligence to rely on. Now she had a handful of concerned townsfolk and a diner owner who refused to be intimidated. It was a stark contrast, but Lucy found a flicker of pride in the community's spirit. "If we stand together, maybe we can push them out quietly," she thought. But deep down, she suspected a larger showdown was inevitable. The Scorpion gang wasn't likely to back off unless they were forced to. One afternoon, Lucy was wiping down tables after the lunch rush when a man walked in who immediately caught her attention. He wasn't one of the bikers, but he had the same kind of confident stride that suggested military training, or at least some kind of professional background. He was tall, lean, with a shaved head and a discreet tattoo on his forearm that looked vaguely like a special operations insignia. He scanned the room quickly, as if evaluating potential threats. Lucy recognized that look all too well. She had done the same thing countless times, entering unknown territory in places far more hostile than rural Texas. He took a seat at the counter, ordered a black coffee, and offered Lucy a small smile. "Been on the road for a while. Mind if I sit here and rest a bit?" Lucy nodded, eyeing him curiously. "Help yourself," she said, returning the smile but keeping a cautious distance. The last thing she needed was another potential source of trouble, but something about him felt different, a kind of underlying respect in the way he observed his surroundings. They exchanged a few pleasantries. His name was Garrett. He claimed he was just passing through, looking for work wherever he could find it. He asked about the town, the local economy, if there were any construction jobs available. Lucy studied him more closely, noticing the calluses on his hands, the scars on his knuckles, and the subtle way he kept his back to the wall even while seated. It was second nature for some men who'd seen combat to position themselves advantageously. She recognized the posture. Eventually, Garrett asked if there'd been any trouble in the area, and Lucy's guard went up a notch. She chose her words carefully, not wanting to reveal too much to a stranger. "Small towns always have their share of problems," she said vaguely. Garrett nodded as if he understood there was more to the story. "I might stick around a few days," he commented, sipping his coffee. "Something tells me this place could use an extra set of eyes." Before Lucy could probe his intentions further, Miss Dixie emerged from the back, greeting Garrett warmly. "We don't get too many visitors who stay," she said. "But if you're looking for honest work, you might check the ranches. They're always in need of strong backs." Lucy watched the exchange, a nagging feeling that Garrett wasn't just any drifter. Had he heard about the bikers, or was he running from something of his own? She decided to keep an eye on him. If he really was ex-military, maybe he'd be more of an ally than a threat. Still, Lucy wasn't about to reveal her own background. Not yet. As Garrett finished his coffee and paid, he nodded politely to both Dixie and Lucy. "Thanks for the hospitality. If I see or hear anything interesting, I'll be sure to let you know." With that, he left, leaving Lucy with more questions than answers. She busied herself with cleaning the counter, but her mind kept drifting to the new stranger. In the midst of a looming biker problem, was his arrival just a coincidence or something more? Later that evening, as twilight draped the sky in purple and orange hues, Lucy decided to venture out to the old barn where she stored her gear. She took a circuitous route, making sure no one was following her. The roads were quiet, punctuated only by the occasional howl of a coyote or the distant rumble of a truck. When she arrived, she moved swiftly, unlocking the heavy padlock and slipping inside. Flicking on a small flashlight, Lucy approached the trunk that held her old equipment. Her heart thumped heavier with each step. She lifted the lid and ran her hands over the carefully arranged items. Her well-worn tactical vest, a disassembled carbine, a few sidearms, boxes of ammo, night vision goggles, and other specialized tools. Each piece carried a weight of memory. Missions in the desert, jungle raids, hostage extractions. Images of her past flickered through her mind like snapshots from another life. With deliberate care, she began to inspect the gear. She oiled what needed oiling, checked the sights on her rifle, and loaded a few magazines. A part of her felt a pang of guilt. She had promised herself she'd left this life behind. But another part of her felt an adrenaline spike, an undeniable sense of purpose stirring in her veins. She wasn't going to wait around for these bikers to escalate their campaign unchecked. If push came to shove, she wanted to be ready. Suddenly, a noise outside made her freeze. A rustling sound, like someone stepping on dry leaves. Lucy's training kicked in. She killed the flashlight and crouched low, listening. Another shuffle. Her mind raced through options. Could it be Garrett, one of the bikers, a random trespasser? She quietly slid the sidearm from the trunk, checking that the safety was off, but keeping her finger off the trigger. Then she inched toward the barn door, heart pounding, yet mind surprisingly calm. She paused, listening intently. The sound came again, but it moved away this time, as if whoever or whatever was outside had decided to keep going. Lucy waited a full minute before daring to crack the door open. The moonlight revealed nothing but shadows across the field. No parked vehicles, no telltale motorcycle headlights in the distance. Eventually, the only sound was the night wind and a distant chorus of crickets. Slowly, Lucy let out a breath, stepping outside to scan the perimeter. Finding nothing amiss, she returned inside the barn and locked the trunk. Clearly, her nerves were on high alert, but given the circumstances, that was justified. On the drive back home, Lucy couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been nearby. It might have been an animal, a stray dog or a coyote, but it could just as easily have been one of the bikers snooping around. The incident reminded her how crucial it was to move carefully. She resolved to keep her guard up. If the gang was scoping out the area to see who might resist them, Lucy needed to make sure they didn't identify her as a threat until she was ready to strike back. The following morning, Lucy woke up early, determined to gather more information. She decided to drive into the heart of town, a modest strip of businesses, including a general store, a hardware shop, and the local bar, the Rusted Spur. She parked her old pickup on a side street and walked along the main drag, nodding to familiar faces. She soon spotted Garrett standing outside the general store chatting with the owner, a kindly older man named Frank. Frank's usually jovial face looked serious as he gestured toward the far end of town, where a few motorcycles could be seen parked near a vacant warehouse. Lucy approached, catching snippets of their conversation. "They're poking around that old place," Frank was saying, asking if it was for sale or rent. "I told them it's condemned, but they didn't seem to mind." Garrett nodded thoughtfully, tipping his cap in acknowledgement. Lucy cleared her throat and both men looked up. "Morning, Lucy," Frank greeted. "We were just talking about our new friends." He said the last word with a bitter twist. Garrett's gaze met Lucy's, his expression guarded but curious. "Heard you had a run-in with them at the diner," he said. Lucy shrugged, not wanting to share too many details. "Just a little intimidation. Nothing we can't handle." Garrett smiled wryly. "Is that so?" Frank glanced back at the motorcycles. "I'm worried they're trying to set up some kind of headquarters here. That old warehouse used to store cattle feed until it was shut down for safety violations. If they don't care about the state of the building, maybe they plan to fix it up for their own use." The notion of the bikers establishing a permanent base unsettled Lucy. With a stronghold, they could more effectively organize their intimidation tactics and possibly expand to more serious crimes. As they stood talking, one of the bikers emerged from the warehouse, spotting the three of them across the street. He stared for a moment before disappearing back inside. Lucy felt the hair on her arms rise. They're clocking us too, she thought. It was a reminder that the town wasn't just passively watching the bikers. The bikers were watching the town back. Anyway, Frank said nervously, I've got to open up. You two stay safe. He ambled back into the general store, leaving Lucy alone with Garrett. For a moment, they sized each other up. Finally, Garrett broke the silence. I know you can handle yourself, he said, but this is bigger than just a couple of rowdy bikers looking for free meals. Lucy nodded. I know, I've seen their type before. They won't stop until they've got this town under their thumb or someone pushes back. Hard. Garrett studied her for a moment, his gaze flicking to her arms, perhaps noticing the faint scars. If you ever need help, he said quietly, I'm around. I've dealt with my fair share of unpleasant situations. Lucy didn't respond right away. She couldn't afford to trust too easily. But something in Garrett's demeanor struck her as genuine, even if he was holding back pieces of his own story. I'll keep that in mind, she finally said, before turning to walk back to her truck. She could feel his eyes on her as she left, and she wondered if they might end up on the same side of the fight that was brewing. By the end of the week, tensions had escalated further. The Scorpion Patch bikers were no longer just rumors. They were a consistent presence. They began frequenting the Rusted Spur in the evenings, rolling up in loud processions that rattled windows and frayed nerves. There were reports of bar fights, and while no one had been seriously injured yet, the violence level was clearly ticking up. The sheriff and his deputies did what they could, but the gang was cunning. They avoided directly attacking law enforcement, instead pushing around townsfolk who were less likely to file official complaints. Lucy noticed the diners at Dixie's Haven were quieter these days, as if everyone was waiting for the other shoe to drop. Conversations were hushed, eyes drifted nervously to the windows whenever a motorcycle's rumble was heard. Ms. Dixie tried to keep spirits high, offering extra slices of pie on the house or free refills of coffee, but it wasn't enough to ease the collective worry. One night, Lucy was in the back of the diner helping Raymond close up when a frantic knocking rattled the front door. The sign had already been flipped to closed, but Lucy rushed to open it, finding a young couple on the doorstep. They were visibly shaken, tears in the woman's eyes. Please help us, the man said, voice trembling. They cornered us out on the highway, demanded money. When we said we didn't have enough, they slashed our tires. We managed to get away, but our car is stuck down the road. Lucy ushered them inside, locking the door behind them. She had them sit down while she fetched some water. What did they look like? She asked, though she already suspected the answer. Bikers, the woman whispered, with a scorpion emblem. We thought we were going to be robbed, or worse. Raymond let out a low whistle. This is getting out of hand, he muttered. Lucy agreed. This was no longer just intimidation. It was outright highway robbery. If the gang felt emboldened enough to attack travelers on the open road, the situation was spiraling fast. After letting them calm down, Lucy stepped outside with Raymond to assess the situation. The night sky loomed, silent and tense. She could see the faint glow of headlights far in the distance. Take them home, Lucy told Raymond, and then check on their car in the morning. Make sure they're safe. Raymond nodded, though worry etched his face. What about you? He asked. Lucy forced a small smile, though her heart pounded. I'll be fine, she said. I'm just going to stay behind for a bit and make sure everything is locked down. When Raymond and the couple left, Lucy felt a swell of anger burn in her chest. This was exactly what she feared, the gang terrorizing innocent people. She locked the diner's doors, then reached for her phone. She considered calling the sheriff, but it was likely too late for him to be of much help right now. Instead, she dialed a different number, a contact from her old life, someone who owed her a favor. The phone rang twice before a gruff voice answered. Lucy hesitated, her mind swirling with memories of missions past and a code of silence she once never dared to break. But this was bigger than her old promises. Hey, she finally said, I might need a hand. You remember how we used to handle hostage situations in Kandahar? Well, I've got something brewing here that might require some expertise. With that, Lucy set into motion the first step of a plan that would eventually reveal just how dangerous and capable she truly was. But for now, her secrets remained her own, and the sleepy town remained blissfully unaware of the storm that was about to break. The next morning, Lucy rose early, still feeling the residue of last night's tension coiling in her chest. She'd barely slept after making that phone call, replaying old memories of covert missions and tactical operations. The diner wouldn't open for a few hours, but Lucy had no intention of staying idle. She grabbed her truck keys and headed out toward a remote patch of land where she could think clearly. An abandoned ranch a few miles from the diner. Once a thriving homestead, it now lay in overgrown disrepair, with rusted fencing and a half-collapsed barn overtaken by weeds. The place offered solitude, and more importantly, a discreet spot to meet someone without prying eyes. Stepping out onto the dusty ground, she surveyed the horizon. The Texas sun had barely begun its climb, painting the sky in pale blues and pinks. Lucy walked around, checking vantage points, recalling the best cover positions. If her old contact agreed to show up, she wanted to be sure no one else was watching. At times, she felt a pang of guilt for dragging the ghosts of her past into this quiet town. Yet the biker's aggression had crossed a line. Innocent people were scared, and Lucy's moral code wouldn't allow her to simply stand by. After about 15 minutes, she heard the distant hum of an engine. Moments later, an unremarkable sedan, a common make and model, rolled onto the property. The driver's silhouette was hard to make out behind tinted windows. Lucy felt her pulse quicken, instinctively checking for her sidearm, though she'd left it locked in her truck. As the car stopped, the engine cut, and a tall figure stepped out. He wore jeans, a plain t-shirt, and a baseball cap pulled low. Lucy recognized him immediately. Marcus Red Kenning, a former intelligence specialist she'd worked with overseas. He'd gotten the nickname Red not from his hair color. He had none, being mostly bald, but from the fiery way he handled high-pressure situations. They stood a few feet apart, scanning each other's faces. Though they'd parted ways amicably years ago, there was still a sense of caution, an acknowledgement that time and distance could change alliances. Finally, Red cracked a small smile. "Been a while," he said, voice gruff with unspoken history. Lucy returned the greeting with a nod. "Thanks for coming. I wouldn't have called if it wasn't serious." Red lifted an eyebrow. "You always did have a flair for understatement." They spent the next half hour walking the property, discussing the situation. Lucy recounted the bikers' intimidation, the threats at the diner, and last night's incident with the stranded couple. She explained how local law enforcement seemed overstretched and how the gang appeared on the verge of turning the town into a personal fiefdom. Red listened intently, occasionally asking pointed questions about the gang's size, resources, and behavioral patterns. His background in intelligence operations made him adept at forming a mental profile of adversaries. By the time Lucy finished, he wore a grim expression. "Sounds like they're systematically testing boundaries, seeing how far they can push before they face real resistance. If you don't push back, they'll get bolder." Lucy exhaled, relieved to have someone with a similar skill set to confide in. She wasn't entirely sure how far Red was willing to go. He'd retired from the field for a reason, same as she had, but at least now she wasn't alone. Together, they began sketching out potential strategies on a notepad Red pulled from his back pocket. If the bikers wanted to bully the town, Lucy and Red would make sure they faced an adversary far more formidable than they ever anticipated. While Lucy and Red planned in secret, the tension in town continued to mount. Over at the Rusted Spur, the local bar, an uneasy standoff had been brewing. Bartenders reported that whenever the biker gang rolled in, regular customers tended to clear out early to avoid trouble. The scorpion emblazoned jackets became a nightly fixture, dominating the pool tables, commandeering the jukebox, and running up tabs they often neglected to pay. Fear seeped into conversations at every corner of the bar, whether it was the old-timer nursing his whiskey in solitude or the young waitress collecting empty beer glasses. One evening, a dispute erupted between the bikers and a group of oil field workers passing through town. Words escalated into shoves, and soon fists were flying. Shattered glass littered the floor, and chairs got knocked over. By the time the sheriff and his lone deputy arrived, the bikers had slipped out the back, leaving behind bruised and bewildered oil workers who wanted no part in pressing charges. "They threatened to come after us if we talked," one of them murmured, cradling a busted lip. The sheriff took a statement, but without formal complaints or evidence of any major crime, his hands were effectively tied. News of the brawl traveled fast. Within a day, half the town was buzzing with exaggerated rumors of gunfire and hostage-taking, though neither had happened. Yet, still a palpable sense of dread clung to the streets. At the diner, Lucy noticed how customers kept glancing at the door, jumping whenever the faint sound of a motorcycle engine approached in the distance. Ms. Dixie, though outwardly defiant, had begun to lose her usual spark. Even her characteristic sassy banter was subdued as she fretted over the safety of her employees and customers. It wasn't just the diner or the bar feeling the pressure. Local farmers reported finding fences cut, livestock scattered, and mysterious tire tracks running across their fields. Those who dared confront any suspicious figures typically found themselves on the receiving end of threats, if not outright vandalism. The once peaceful Texan farmland was rapidly transforming into a patchwork of fear zones. Lucy observed all of this with growing frustration. She'd seen a similar pattern in conflict zones overseas, a small group testing boundaries and sowing chaos until their grip tightened, culminating in outright tyranny. Yet Lucy refused to let despair take root. She had Red now, and with him came the prospect of coordinated resistance. They couldn't rely solely on the sheriff, nor could they expect the townsfolk to arm themselves en masse. Many of these people were law-abiding citizens, unaccustomed to organized violence. Asking them to stand up to a gang of hardened criminals seemed unrealistic without a carefully orchestrated plan. That's where Lucy's and Red's backgrounds came into play. They understood how to run reconnaissance, gather intel, and use psychological operations to sow doubt among the enemy ranks, if it came to that. In the meantime, Lucy continued to project a calm front, especially at the diner. She noticed Garrett, the drifter who'd displayed a hint of military bearing, dropping by more often. Sometimes he just ordered a coffee and made small talk. Other times he seemed to be watching the place, as though waiting for something. Lucy kept her distance, but she couldn't shake the feeling he might be an ally, or perhaps even something more. For now, she focused on forging a clandestine network of her own. If the bikers wanted a war for control of this town, they'd soon find themselves up against veterans who excelled at covert engagements. Late one evening, Lucy and Red sat in Lucy's worn-out truck outside an abandoned service station near the county line. The place had become a makeshift observation post, chosen for its vantage point on a stretch of highway the bikers frequently traveled. Lucy gripped a pair of old binoculars, scanning the road for signs of the scorpion patch. They'd picked up on patterns. Certain nights, the gang seemed to shuttle supplies to the condemned warehouse, presumably fortifying it. Occasionally, they came and went with unknown individuals, possibly forging alliances or bringing in reinforcements. Red rummaged through a small duffel bag, pulling out a specialized camera with a telephoto lens. "Let's see if we can ID some faces tonight," he suggested. "If we can match them to known felons or track their movements, we might have something concrete to give the sheriff, or use ourselves." Lucy nodded, her breath misting against the side window. Though Texas nights could be warm, a certain chill clung to the air, or perhaps it was just the tension gnawing at her nerves. They waited in silence for nearly an hour, speaking only in whispers when necessary. The moon was just a sliver, offering minimal light. Lucy recalled nights in Afghanistan, perched atop rooftops with her squad, the desert wind howling in her ears. She'd never expected to revisit that kind of tactical vigilance in her post-military life, much less in a place like rural Texas. Yet here she was, heart pounding, every sense heightened by the prospect of looming conflict. Finally, the low rumble of motorcycles broke the quiet. Two headlights appeared on the horizon, growing brighter as they approached. Lucy and Red exchanged a glance, and Red readied the camera. As the bikes drew closer, Lucy trained the binoculars on them. Sure enough, scorpion patches gleamed in the faint glow of passing headlights. The riders slowed near the old service station, as though they sensed they were being watched. Lucy tensed, sliding down in her seat to minimize visibility. The last thing they needed was to tip off the gang to their surveillance. After a few tense moments, the bikers continued on, heading into town. Red managed to snap a series of rapid-fire shots. Once they were out of earshot, Lucy exhaled. "We need to see if these are new faces," she murmured. Red nodded, already reviewing the images on the camera's display. "Hard to say yet, but it looks like the same group we've seen around. No sign of that big one, Cage, though." He frowned, which might mean he's overseeing bigger plans elsewhere. Lucy stared at the empty stretch of road, her thoughts grim. The bikers' pattern suggested they were solidifying a base in the old warehouse, possibly stockpiling weapons or contraband. If they were forging alliances with other criminal outfits, the town could soon be dealing with more than just petty intimidation. Lucy's mind raced with contingency plans: infiltration, sabotage, a carefully orchestrated confrontation. But every option carried risks. If done wrong, innocent people could get caught in the crossfire. She and Red needed more intel before taking decisive action. For now, they'd continue the quiet watch, gathering information piece by piece, preparing for the day when the real fight would inevitably begin. The next day at the diner, Lucy tried to go about her normal routine, though her mind was thick with the previous night's observations. She'd barely caught a few hours of restless sleep before returning to open up. As she poured coffee for a couple of elderly regulars, she overheard fragments of hushed conversation about the bikers. More rumors of vandalism, another story about someone's barn door being kicked in. Lucy's hands tensed around the coffee pot, but she forced herself to maintain a calm facade. Around mid-morning, Garrett strolled in. He took a seat at the counter, nodding in greeting. Lucy offered a polite smile and poured him a cup without asking. He never ordered anything else. "Busy day?" he asked, flicking a quick glance around the diner. "As busy as it gets," Lucy replied coolly. She had grown slightly more comfortable with him, but she still wasn't ready to trust him fully. Part of her was curious about his motives for staying in town. He certainly wasn't a local, and she saw no sign he had found ranch work or any other job. After a moment, Garrett leaned in, speaking low. "I saw you last night," he said. "Or at least, I'm pretty sure it was you. That beat-up truck parked near the old gas station, right?" Lucy felt her pulse jump. She kept her expression neutral, forcing a casual shrug. "Could have been any old truck," she said. "Lots of them around." Garrett smirked, tapping a finger on the counter. "Yeah, but not one with the same dent on the rear fender that yours has." Lucy swallowed hard, scanning the diner to ensure no one else was listening. "Careful who you follow," she whispered. "Might get you in trouble." Garrett shrugged, taking a sip of his coffee. "I'm not trying to cause trouble, just making an observation. I've also been watching these bikers, trying to figure out their end game. They're more organized than they look. And you, Lucy Garrington, don't strike me as just a small-town waitress." His tone was even, not accusatory, but the words hung in the air like a challenge. Before Lucy could respond, the bell above the door jingled, signaling another arrival. In walked two of the Scorpion Patch bikers, wearing grim expressions. They scanned the diner, zeroing in on Garrett at the counter and Lucy standing opposite him. Lucy's posture stiffened, adrenaline kicking in. One of the bikers, a heavy-set man with a snake tattoo winding across his neck, approached. He peered at Garrett, then turned to Lucy. "We're hungry," he stated, though his tone made it sound more like a threat than a request. Stepping away from Garrett, Lucy grabbed menus. "Take any seat you like," she said, her voice carefully steady. The biker took the menu, but didn't look at it, his gaze fixed on Lucy's face. "We also need to have a word with Miss Dixie," he added, "about certain financial matters." Lucy maintained her composure, though her heart pounded. She'd seen men try this tactic overseas, intimidation through direct eye contact and invasive questioning. "She's not in at the moment," Lucy said, "but if you have a message, I can pass it along." The biker's lips twisted into a sneer, as though he found her refusal to quiver amusing. "We'll wait," he said ominously, motioning for his companion to slide into a booth. The two bikers settled into the booth as though they owned it. One drummed his fingers on the table. The other, sporting a scraggly goatee, stared pointedly at Garrett. Lucy's stomach churned with apprehension. She could feel the electric tension in the diner. Other customers sat rigidly, eyes darting away whenever the bikers looked around. Even Ms. Dixie, who was usually bustling about with a cheerful word for everyone, chose to remain in the kitchen, giving Lucy an apologetic glance through the pass window. Lucy knew exactly what was running through her boss's mind. How bad will this get if we say no to whatever they want? Garrett continued sipping his coffee in conspicuous silence. He looked almost relaxed, casually leaning on the counter, but Lucy noticed his stance, feet planted firmly, shoulders squared. He was alert, ready. Occasionally he'd lock eyes with the goateed biker, who glared back as if daring Garrett to start something. Lucy could almost sense the potential for violence swirling between them, like a storm cloud waiting to unleash. "Coffee?" Lucy asked, forcing her voice to remain light as she approached the biker's booth with a fresh pot. The heavier man with the snake tattoo nodded stiffly, refusing to meet her gaze. His companion jerked his mug forward in a silent demand for a refill. Lucy obliged, careful not to make contact. She'd learned long ago that showing fear or defiance at the wrong moment could escalate a situation. There was a delicate balance in these interactions. She had to remain outwardly calm and non-threatening while never truly surrendering her ground. After the coffee pour, Snake Tattoo leaned forward. "Tell Ms. Dixie we're not leaving until we talk about how this diner can contribute to our cause," he said in a low voice. Lucy's jaw clenched. She played dumb. "I'm not sure what you mean," she replied, "but I'll let her know you're here to see her." The biker's lip curled. "Don't play stupid. We know this place does good business. We want a piece of it. That's how it works now. Everyone pays their share." Lucy stepped back, biting down her retort. She wanted to say something cutting, something that would reveal exactly how little these thugs understood about who they were messing with. But she knew it would be the wrong move. The diner was filled with innocent people, and a single spark could turn this into a hostage situation. Instead, she nodded once, then turned on her heel, heading for the kitchen. Behind the swinging door, Ms. Dixie stood with clenched fists. "Lucy, I can't keep doing this," she whispered urgently. "These men are bullies. I'd rather close the diner than give them a single dime." Lucy laid a reassuring hand on Dixie's arm. "I won't let them threaten you," she promised. "But right now, we need to stay calm. Let's hear them out, stall for time, and I'll make some calls." Dixie's expression flickered with relief, though fear still shadowed her eyes. "All right," she relented, "but be careful. I can't lose my best waitress or my friend." Lucy nodded and slipped out of the kitchen, her mind already racing with backup plans. While the bikers waited, Lucy took a moment to discreetly step outside and call Red. She moved behind the diner, pressing herself against the brick wall to stay out of sight. She spoke in a hushed tone, explaining the situation. Two gang members were inside, demanding to see Ms. Dixie, presumably for extortion. "What do I do?" she asked, feeling the weight of responsibility for everyone inside. Red's reply was measured. "Keep them talking. Avoid direct confrontation. I can be there in 15 minutes with some deterrence. But we need to play this smart." Lucy swallowed. She knew Red would be armed and ready, but was that the right move? Guns drawn in a public diner could lead to chaos. Innocent lives could be at risk if the bikers panicked. "Let me see if I can defuse this first," she said. "Stand by." She ended the call, taking a moment to steady her breathing. Part of her missed the clarity of military rules of engagement, where you had a clear chain of command, an objective, and a team at your back. Here the lines were blurred. There was no official mission, just a moral imperative to protect the town. She returned to find the bikers growing impatient. One tapped his foot loudly, while the other stood and cracked his knuckles. Garrett remained at the counter, observing with a cool, narrowed gaze. Lucy approached the booth, feigning a polite smile. "Ms. Dixie will be out soon," she lied. "Can I get you anything else while you wait?" The heavier biker barked a short, humorless laugh. "We ain't here for a meal, sweetheart." He leaned forward, eyes glinting with malice. "We're here to collect." Before Lucy could reply, the diner's front door swung open. In walked another man wearing the scorpion patch. Though he seemed slightly less imposing than the two in the booth, he glanced around, spotted his comrades, and hurried over. Lucy caught the words, "changed plans," and "Cage wants us back at the warehouse." Instantly, the dynamic shifted. The two seated bikers scowled at each other, clearly annoyed at being called away when they were on the verge of making a statement. "Fine," muttered the one with the goatee, standing up and tossing a crumpled bill onto the table, more as an insult than an actual payment. "But we're coming back. Don't think this is over." With that, the trio strode out, leather jackets rustling. The diner's patrons collectively exhaled as the door slammed shut. Lucy watched through the window as the three mounted their bikes and roared off down the road. Only when the engine noise faded did Miss Dixie emerge from the kitchen, her face etched with worry. "Thank goodness they left," she whispered, wringing her hands. Lucy nodded, relief washing over her. Still, she understood this was just a temporary reprieve. The gang was pressing the diner for a share, and their demands would only get more forceful if not met. She glanced over at Garrett, who continued to watch quietly. He met her gaze with a slight nod, as if acknowledging that they'd both dodged a bullet. For now. But Lucy also suspected that if the gang returned or escalated, the next encounter might not end so peacefully. That afternoon, once the lunch crowd had filtered out, Ms. Dixie made the difficult decision to close the diner early. She posted a handwritten sign on the door, "Closed for maintenance," even though the only maintenance needed was to keep the bikers at bay. Lucy helped her lock up, then walked out to the parking lot, scanning for any sign of the scorpion patches. All remained quiet, but the hush felt unsettling rather than peaceful, as though the town itself was bracing for another wave of intimidation. Lucy hopped into her truck and made a quick call to Red, updating him on the short-lived confrontation. "They got called away," she explained, "but they'll be back." Red listened quietly, then replied, "I've done some preliminary digging. There's chatter about smaller biker gangs merging under a larger umbrella. It's possible this Scorpion crew is trying to prove their worth to a bigger criminal network. If that's the case, extorting the diner is just the tip of the iceberg." Lucy frowned, rubbing her temples. "So they might be planning to grow their numbers. Great." She closed her eyes, picturing the quiet farmland she'd chosen for its serenity, now at risk of becoming a hotbed for organized crime. She asked, "Any idea how we can get ahead of them?" Red paused, then said, "We could hit them where it hurts. Logistics. If they're stockpiling or transporting contraband, we sabotage their supply lines. But we'll need more concrete intel first. Let's meet tonight and go over our options." After ending the call, Lucy drove aimlessly for a while, her thoughts churning with moral quandaries. She'd sworn off violence after her Delta Force days, hoping to find peace in the simplicity of rural life. Yet these bikers threatened that fragile calm, and the townspeople were too frightened or ill-equipped to stand up to them. The law was overwhelmed. She realized that, like it or not, she was uniquely positioned to intervene. But the specter of her past, those missions that left scars both visible and invisible, weighed heavily on her. How far am I willing to go this time, she wondered. Eventually, Lucy found herself pulling into the old barn she privately owned. The place had become a refuge of sorts, where she could quietly plan without fear of onlookers. Stepping inside, she flicked on a lantern, revealing the trunk of gear she'd inspected before. The sight of her tactical equipment sent a ripple of conflicting emotions through her. Pride in her capabilities battled with the desire to keep a low profile. But the memory of the frightened couple at the diner doors, along with Ms. Dixie's anxious face, hardened her resolve. If the bikers insisted on a showdown, Lucy wouldn't shrink from the fight. She spent the next hour methodically checking the condition of her weapons and gear. She affixed a flashlight to a rifle rail, tested the radio earpiece, and laid out a simple kit of medical supplies. Every action reminded her of deployments past, the calm before the storm. Finally, she locked everything up again and leaned against the barn wall, exhaling in a mix of determination and dread. The path ahead was becoming clearer, but it was strewn with potential dangers, not just for her, but for everyone around her. Night fell swiftly, bringing with it the comforting chorus of cicadas and a warm breeze that rustled the sparse trees lining the roads. Lucy and Red convened at the old ranch property where they'd first met. This time, Red arrived on foot from a nearby dirt road, avoiding drawing attention with a vehicle. Lucy had parked her truck under a cluster of oaks, branches camouflaging it from casual passers-by. Under a sky speckled with stars, they laid out a map of the county on the hood of Lucy's truck, using a small penlight for illumination. Red pointed to the condemned warehouse on the edge of town. From what I've observed, and based on your intel, this is their main hub. They've been coming and going at odd hours, and I've seen a couple of large unmarked trucks parked there as well. They could be moving merchandise, guns, drugs, who knows. Either way, it's suspicious. Lucy traced a route on the map with her finger, marking the abandoned service station where they'd conducted surveillance. They travel this stretch frequently. If we were to intercept them, that road offers decent cover. She paused, glancing up at Red. But I don't want to start a firefight unless we have no choice. We need something that pushes them out without bloodshed, if possible. Red pressed his lips together, considering. We could disable their vehicles, sugar in the gas tanks, spike strips, basic sabotage to make them think twice about rolling through so confidently. Lucy nodded slowly. That might be a start, but we risk retaliation, and they might take it out on innocent townsfolk. She grimaced, recalling how insurgent groups often punished entire villages for the actions of a few. The last thing she wanted was to provoke more violence. They mulled over other tactics like capturing a key member for leverage or planting false intel to sow mistrust within the gang. Lucy's background in psychological operations came into play as she outlined how misinformation campaigns could fracture alliances. Yet each plan carried risks, and they had limited manpower. As they talked, the night air grew cooler, forcing them to huddle closer over the map. At one point, Lucy's phone buzzed. She checked the screen. Garrett. Furrowing her brow, she picked up. Yeah, she said quietly. Garrett's voice crackled on the line. Saw some bikers near the warehouse just now. They looked agitated. Figured you'd want to know. Lucy exchanged a glance with Red, who nodded. She whispered into the phone, thanks for the tip. Keep your head down. She ended the call and looked at Red, her gut churning with a mix of suspicion and relief. Garrett was watching the bikers too, but why? Was he genuinely concerned, or did he have an agenda of his own? Nonetheless, the information was invaluable. If the gang was on edge, something might have shifted in their operation. It could be an internal power struggle, or they could be preparing a show of force. Either way, Lucy and Red agreed it was time to ramp up their reconnaissance. Before they parted ways, they made a pact to meet again in 2 days with updates. As Lucy drove off into the darkness, she felt a grim sense of purpose. They were heading deeper into a conflict that neither had asked for, but both were uniquely equipped to confront. In the days that followed, tension in the town crescendoed. The bikers appeared bolder, riding through residential streets late at night, revving their engines to wake sleeping families. Petty crimes spiked, car windows smashed, porch lights shattered, graffiti marking the scorpion emblem sprayed on fences. Fear thickened the air, and a palpable fatigue settled over townsfolk who felt besieged in their own homes. Lucy doubled her efforts at the diner, trying to maintain a sense of normalcy for the customers. Ms. Dixie confided that her revenue was plummeting. People were too frightened to dine out after dark. Daytime business remained steady, but the usual warmth and chatter had been replaced by anxious glances and whispered updates. Even the local kids seemed to sense the change. They no longer played freely outside, and parents kept watchful eyes on them at all times. One afternoon, Sheriff Hopkins finally called Lucy to ask if she'd seen anything. His voice carried an undercurrent of desperation. I know you keep late hours sometimes, he said. Any suspicious activity you might have witnessed could help. Lucy hesitated, careful not to reveal her covert surveillance with Red. Just the usual sightings of their bikes, she said vaguely. They seemed to be focusing on that warehouse on the outskirts. The sheriff sighed heavily. We've tried to get a warrant to search it, but the judge wants more proof of illegal activity. Unless we catch them red-handed, our hands are tied. By the time Lucy ended the call, her frustration mirrored the sheriff's. It seemed the legal system was ill-equipped to handle a gang that specialized in intimidation rather than overt crimes. Unless the bikers made a critical misstep, like brandishing weapons openly or harming someone in a way that couldn't be ignored, law enforcement would remain hamstrung. Lucy shared the update with Red later that evening. He nodded grimly. Then we need to engineer a misstep, something that forces them into the open. That same night, Lucy spotted Garrett lingering in the diner's parking lot as she closed up. He leaned against a lamppost, face partially obscured by shadows, For a moment, Lucy tensed, wondering if he'd been waiting to ambush her with more questions. But when she stepped outside, he merely greeted her with a nod. "Heard a rumor the bikers are planning something big," he said quietly. "Maybe a full-scale shakedown of the businesses around here. Figured you'd want to know." Lucy studied him, searching for hidden motives in his calm gaze. "Why tell me?" she asked. Garrett shrugged. "Because this place feels like ground zero for whatever's coming, and you don't strike me as the type to run." His eyes flickered with a hint of admiration. Or was it curiosity? Lucy decided to take a chance. "If you're so interested, maybe you can help. I have contacts who are putting together a plan to deal with this. But it's risky. We need people who can handle themselves." Garrett took a step closer, his voice low. "You won't find me backing down. I've seen my share of conflict. I know how to handle it." Lucy weighed his words carefully, remembering the glimpses of military discipline she'd observed in him. "All right," she replied finally. "Meet me at the old barn on Route 32 tomorrow night, after sundown. If you're serious about standing up to these guys, be there. But come alone." He nodded, understanding the gravity of the invitation. With that, Lucy locked the diner's door and headed to her truck, feeling as though a new piece had just been added to the chessboard. The following evening, the sky was streaked with fiery shades of orange and crimson as Lucy arrived at the old barn. She parked a short distance away, using the building itself as cover. Spotting no other vehicles, she made her way inside, her footfalls echoing on the worn wooden floorboards. The faint smell of hay and dust mingled with the dryness of the Texan air. She set a small lantern on a makeshift table, a couple of crates stacked together, and waited. Before long, footsteps crunched outside. Lucy tensed, reaching for a concealed pistol in her waistband. The door creaked open to reveal Garrett, his silhouette outlined by the fading twilight. He raised his hands in a non-threatening gesture, stepping into the lantern's glow. "You said come alone," he'd murmured. "Here I am." Lucy relaxed, but only slightly. "Appreciate it." She gestured for him to close the door behind him. A moment later, Red emerged from the shadows, arms folded across his chest. Garrett's gaze flicked to him, and Lucy introduced them briefly. "This is Red, an old friend of mine." She then turned to Red, who was regarding Garrett with guarded scrutiny. "He wants to help." For a few beats, tension hummed in the dusty air as the three weighed each other's intentions. Finally, Red gave a curt nod. "We could use more hands." He motioned to the trunk that housed their equipment. "We've been gathering intel on the bikers. They're stockpiling something at the warehouse on the edge of town. Could be weapons, could be stolen goods. We don't know yet." Lucy stepped forward. "They're intimidating everyone, targeting businesses for protection money. It's escalating fast. The sheriff can't move in without hard evidence. So we aim to get that evidence or disrupt their plans so thoroughly they're forced to retreat." Garrett listened, his expression unreadable. Eventually he spoke. "If they're as organized as you say, we need to hit them in a way they don't expect. Surprise them, and we'll need to move quickly." Lucy nodded, impressed by how swiftly he grasped the situation. "Exactly, but we need a strategy that minimizes risk to innocent bystanders. No shootouts in the middle of town." Red tapped the side of the trunk with his boot. "We have some gear, night vision, scouting equipment, a few extras. We can do a stealth recon, gather video or photographic proof of illegal activity. If we hand that to the sheriff, maybe he'll finally have enough to shut them down." He paused, looking at Lucy. "Or we act on our own, sabotage their operation from the inside, but that carries its own dangers." Garrett locked eyes with Lucy, a flicker of determination in his gaze. "I'm in, whichever route we take." Lucy felt a mix of relief and caution. Trusting newcomers was never her strong suit, but they needed every advantage. "Then let's start with recon," she decided. "If we find proof of heavy contraband, the sheriff can't ignore it." That night, as darkness settled fully, they pored over maps, assigned roles, and planned for a covert infiltration of the warehouse. The hum of cicadas outside provided a backdrop to their hushed conversation. Each step of their plan was laid out with methodical care, every contingency considered. Lucy sensed the old adrenaline spike of a pending mission, a feeling she'd once sworn never to chase again. Yet here she was, gearing up alongside two men whose help she couldn't refuse, preparing to protect a town that might never even know how close it came to the brink. The next night, the trio set their plan into motion. Dressed in dark, unassuming clothing, Lucy, Red, and Garrett drove separately to a wooded area behind the warehouse, parking their vehicles under thick foliage. From there, they proceeded on foot, careful to keep their flashlights off and their voices to a minimum. Red led the way, using a handheld GPS and a satellite image on his phone to navigate the best approach. The warehouse loomed ahead, its corrugated metal walls rusted and pockmarked, surrounded by debris from past industrial use. Lucy peered through a pair of night vision binoculars. The building had a perimeter fence with a locked gate, but the barbed wire looked patchy, as though the bikers hadn't bothered to fully secure it yet. Two motorcycles were parked near a side entrance lit by a single bulb. Lucy scanned for guards or lookouts, spotting only one figure smoking a cigarette by the door. They crouched behind a row of old shipping crates, conferring in whispers. "Red, you get the footage," Lucy said, handing him a compact video camera. "Garrett and I will try to circle around back, see if there's another entrance." Red nodded, slipping the camera into a small pouch. Garrett adjusted a small earpiece and gave Lucy a determined look. "Ready when you are." Moving in a low crouch, Lucy and Garrett crept toward the rear of the warehouse, stepping carefully to avoid debris that might crunch underfoot. The night was still, save for the distant hum of cicadas. As they neared the backside, Lucy noticed a service door propped open with a cinder block. A faint glow seeped from within, indicating interior lights. She exchanged a glance with Garrett, who nodded. This could be their way in. They paused at the threshold, listening intently. The faint sound of voices drifted from somewhere inside, along with what could be the clank of metal. Lucy recalled her training, controlled breathing, heightened awareness. She glanced at Garrett, raising 3 fingers, then 2, then 1 before carefully pushing the door open just enough to slip through. Once inside, they pressed themselves against a wall, letting their eyes adjust to the dimly lit corridor. The place smelled of stale air and oil. Old machinery lay scattered, an abandoned relic of the warehouse's former function. They advanced slowly, pausing at each corner. Lucy's heart thudded in her chest. She hadn't done a stealth infiltration like this in years, yet the muscle memory returned, each step deliberate and calculated. Eventually, they reached an interior window that overlooked the main floor. Through the grimy glass, they saw a makeshift setup of tables laden with crates. Men in scorpion patches milled about, some opening boxes, others taking inventory on clipboards. Lucy's breath caught in her throat. This wasn't just petty extortion money. It looked like a full-scale smuggling operation. She recognized some of the items: firearms, ammunition, and possibly drugs concealed in sealed packages. Her pulse quickened at the sight. This was exactly the evidence they needed, but it was also far more dangerous than she'd feared. Garrett gently tapped Lucy's shoulder and gestured for them to move back. She nodded in agreement. They'd seen enough to confirm the bikers were heavily involved in illegal activity, well beyond harassment and vandalism. The plan was to gather proof, then get out quietly. As they prepared to retreat, Lucy's mind raced. If the sheriff sees this, he can't ignore it. But can we escape undetected? Little did she know, an unexpected complication was already unfolding elsewhere in the building. Red had taken up a position near a shattered window on the east side of the warehouse, camera at the ready. Through a gap in the rusted shutters, he captured footage of the gang's illicit operation. Zooming in, he caught the distinctive scorpion emblem on jackets, the crates of suspected contraband, and the faces of multiple men who appeared to be in charge. He murmured updates into his earpiece, confirming that Lucy and Garrett's hunch was correct. They had stumbled onto something big. Just as he was about to reposition for a better angle, Red heard the crunch of footsteps behind him. He whirled around, pressing himself flat against the warehouse wall. A biker, one he hadn't seen before, emerged from the darkness, apparently on patrol. The man carried a flashlight, its beams sweeping across the ground. Red held his breath, praying the beam wouldn't catch the slight glint of his camera lens. With painstaking slowness, he inched backward, keeping his body out of the flashlight's path. The biker paused, suspicious, sniffing the air like a guard dog who sensed an intruder. Red's pulse thundered in his ears, but he kept entirely still. Another moment passed, and the flashlight beam flicked away as the man continued on his route. Relieved, Red let out a silent exhale, yet he knew his luck could run out at any second. They needed to get the footage and disappear before the gang realized they were compromised. A burst of static came through Red's earpiece, garbled whispers from Lucy. He caught fragments. Weave, main floor, heading out. Red understood they were wrapping up inside. Nodding to himself, he ducked low and scurried along the side of the building, camera still rolling. He found a spot where he could capture a clear shot of the interior through another broken window. Inside, he spotted a tall man with a shaved head shouting orders. The men obeyed quickly, further proof of a hierarchical structure. Red zoomed in on the man's face, capturing identifying features: tattoos on his neck, a deep scar running across his eyebrow. This might be the infamous Cage, he thought. As Red documented the scene, a siren-like wail suddenly cut through the night. It wasn't a police siren, but some sort of alarm or alert system from inside the warehouse. Voices grew louder, frantic. The men on the floor scrambled, slamming crates shut and securing them. Red cursed under his breath, wondering if Lucy or Garrett had been spotted. Quickly, he saved the footage to his camera's internal memory, then pulled back from the window. In his earpiece, Lucy's voice sounded more urgent. "They're on to us! Retreat!" Red didn't wait for more. He sprinted back toward the trees, heart hammering. Somewhere behind him, footsteps pounded on concrete, and angry shouts pierced the air. He ducked behind a rusted car frame, glimpsing flashlights sweeping across the foliage. His instincts screamed at him to keep moving, but he also needed to ensure Lucy and Garrett got out safely. He had no idea if they'd been discovered inside or if the alarm was triggered by some other mishap. Either way, their recon mission had turned into a risky scramble for the exit. Taking a calculated risk, Red dashed deeper into the darkness, hoping the bikers wouldn't see him. By the time he reached the agreed-upon rendezvous point, a cluster of trees near the parked vehicles, his lungs burned. He crouched low, scanning the area for signs of Lucy and Garrett. Tension coiled in his gut. Please let them make it out, he thought grimly. Little did he know Lucy and Garrett were facing their own peril inside the building, fighting to avoid a confrontation they weren't prepared to finish. Yet, Lucy and Garrett flattened themselves against a cold steel support beam inside the warehouse as flashing lights began to dance across the walls. A shrill siren echoed in the cavernous space, sending the bikers into a frenzy of shouts and stomping boots. The hush of their earlier infiltration was shattered. Now, frantic voices barked orders, and shadows flickered wildly in the overhead fluorescent lighting. Lucy's eyes darted around the area, seeking a safe path toward the rear exit. She gestured urgently for Garrett to follow. They were close to the door they had used to enter. A battered metal door, slightly ajar, was just ahead, maybe 20 feet. But two armed bikers emerged from a side corridor, scanning the room with flashlights. Lucy signaled it for Garrett to hold position, then ducked behind a pile of crates. Inside the boxes, Lucy caught a glimpse of weapon barrels, likely part of the smuggling cache. They're definitely armed to the teeth, she thought grimly, feeling a surge of adrenaline. From the periphery of her vision, she saw Garrett inch closer. His breathing was measured, his movements disciplined, reminding Lucy of a well-trained operative. She flashed him a silent question. "Ready?" Garrett gave a tight nod, and together they made a swift dash to another set of crates, then another, zigzagging to avoid detection. The blaring siren masked their footsteps, but the swirling lights threatened to reveal their silhouettes at any moment. A voice boomed across the intercom. "Lock down the exits! No one leaves until we find the intruders!" The loudspeaker crackled with interference, but the meaning was clear enough. Lucy clenched her jaw. This was the last thing they needed. They had been so close to slipping out undetected, and now the entire gang was on high alert. She peered over a crate, glimpsing the two bikers from earlier, setting up a makeshift blockade by the main loading dock. They dragged pallets, barrels, anything that could obstruct an escape route. Garrett gently tapped Lucy's shoulder and pointed to a side corridor that might skirt around the blockade. Lucy nodded, trusting his instincts, and they eased forward. The corridor was dimmer, illuminated only by a flickering, fluorescent tube overhead. Their footsteps echoed in the tight space, the alarm fading to a distant screech behind them. When they reached an intersection, they paused. One path led deeper into the maze of storage rooms. The other looped back toward the main floor. Suddenly, footsteps thundered from around the bend. Lucy and Garrett pressed themselves flat against the wall, guns drawn. Her heart pounded, but her mind remained calm, a reflex from countless night raids she'd conducted in her Delta Force days. A single biker appeared, brandishing a pistol and sweeping it side to side. The moment he turned toward them, Lucy struck first, a rapid disarm technique that sent his weapon clattering to the floor. The man swore and swung at Lucy's face, but she ducked swiftly. Garrett pinned the biker's arm behind his back and pressed him against the wall, stifling his shouts with a firm hand over his mouth. Lucy quickly retrieved the fallen pistol and deactivated its safety, just in case. She and Garrett exchanged a silent look, acknowledging the danger of any more entanglements. They weren't here to wage a full-scale war, just to escape with their intel. But if we have to fight, so be it, Lucy thought. Nodding for Garrett to hold the biker in place, she scanned the corridor again. The path looked clear and the exit was somewhere beyond the next corner. The question now was whether they could reach it before the entire gang converged on their position. Outside, Red crouched behind a cluster of weeds and rusted metal scraps near the rendezvous point. His heart pounded with each second that Lucy and Garrett remained unseen. He could hear muffled shouting from inside the warehouse, and the sirens still wailed, cutting through the night like a distress call. The bright moon cast eerie shadows on the ground, making him feel more exposed than he liked. He fiddled with the camera that held precious footage. The temptation to leave right away tugged at him. This video was critical evidence that could finally spur the authorities into action. But leaving Lucy and Garrett behind is not an option, he thought, pushing away the notion. Though he had operated solo plenty of times in the past, Lucy had saved his hide more than once during their military tours. Abandoning her now, after everything she'd risked, was unthinkable. Straining his ears, he caught the distant roar of engines. A few bikers had emerged from the warehouse's front entrance, revving up their motorcycles as though preparing to sweep the area. Red ducked lower, adjusting his position to stay out of the light. He lifted a pair of night vision goggles, scanning the perimeter. Sure enough, two riders circled the building, beams of their headlights cutting across the gravel lot. They seemed to be searching for intruders on the outside, while the rest likely hunted Lucy and Garrett indoors. Time to create a distraction, Red decided. Slipping a small pen light from his pocket, he attached it to a rock with electrical tape, an old trick for misdirection. He set the contraption a safe distance away, angled so the pen light would shine faintly on a chain-link fence. Then, from a concealed position, he tossed another rock into some metal debris. The resulting clatter drew the bikers' attention. Their headlights swung around, focusing on the suspicious noise. The men revved their engines and raced toward the fence line, one shouting, "Over here! I see something!" Red took the opportunity to circle behind them, moving swiftly toward the rear of the warehouse. He prayed that Lucy and Garrett were heading the same direction. If they made it out, they'd likely emerge from one of the side exits or possibly the same door they'd entered. As Red jogged through the shadows, he couldn't resist a bitter smile. The whole situation felt like a covert operation in a war zone, except this time the location was a rundown warehouse in rural Texas, and the stakes were the safety of a small town rather than a nation-state. Yet the tension, the adrenaline, the life-or-death stakes felt hauntingly familiar. An explosion of gunfire shattered the night's stillness. Red froze, stomach lurching. It came from somewhere near the warehouse's interior, echoing through broken windows. He clenched his jaw, hoping it was just a warning shot. Gunfire meant someone inside had panicked or encountered Lucy and Garrett. Stay calm, stay focused, he told himself, forging ahead with quiet determination. Regardless of the alarm, the bikers, or the threat of bullets, Red was resolved to stand by Lucy's side, just like old times, when they'd faced far deadlier adversaries across the globe. Inside the warehouse, Lucy's pulse surged at the unmistakable crack of gunfire. She and Garrett had managed to subdue the lone biker in the corridor, but the shot rang out from somewhere deeper within the structure. It could mean that others were firing blindly in search of them, or worse, that they'd encountered Red. A spike of worry twisted in her gut, though she forced it down to maintain clarity. Signaling Garrett, Lucy began moving once more. Together they advanced in a crouch, staying close to the walls. The swirling emergency lights and klaxon siren gave the corridor an otherworldly feel, as though they were navigating a surreal battleground. Their newly disarmed captive lay unconscious on the floor. Garrett had delivered a swift blow to knock him out quietly, ensuring he couldn't raise an alarm. As they neared the exit door, their luck finally ran out. A pair of bikers rounded the corner. One was lean, jittery, with an assault rifle gripped tightly. The other was broader, brandishing a shotgun. They froze at the sight of Lucy and Garrett. For a split second, nobody moved. Then chaos erupted. The lean biker lunged forward, trying to swing his rifle up, but Lucy squeezed off a shot from the confiscated pistol. The bullet smacked into the crate next to him with a deafening crack, sending splinters of wood flying. The second biker shouted and raised a shotgun. Garrett dove sideways, rolling behind a forklift for cover. The muzzle flash lit the corridor as the shotgun fired, peppering the forklift's metal frame. Lucy hunkered down behind a stack of crates. Her mind raced, calculating the angles. If they waited too long, reinforcements might arrive. But making a break for the door under shotgun fire seemed suicidal. We need a diversion, Lucy thought. She glanced at Garrett across the open space, silently communicating that they had to split the biker's attention. On cue, Garrett picked up a loose metal rod and threw it across the corridor. It clanged loudly, drawing the biker's gaze for a crucial second. Lucy popped out from cover, firing 2 quick shots. One bullet grazed the shotgun wielder's arm, causing him to yelp and stumble. The other shot shattered a fluorescent light overhead, plunging part of the corridor into darkness. Sensing the opening, Lucy dashed forward, sliding behind another row of crates closer to the exit. Garrett seized the moment to rush the lean biker, knocking the rifle aside before the man could properly aim. They grappled violently, boots slipping on the concrete floor. The biker cursed, delivering an elbow to Garrett's ribs. Garrett winced but held firm, using his superior leverage to slam the man against a steel beam, rattling the entire structure. Meanwhile, Lucy fired another shot at the shotgun biker, keeping him pinned behind a large wooden crate. The siren blared on, casting everything in strobing red lights. Lucy felt the old, familiar surge of combat focus. She tried not to think about how outnumbered they were, or how they'd hoped to avoid a firefight altogether. Survival instincts took over. Ducking low, she sprinted toward the side door, flinging it open. Crisp night air rushed in, momentarily disorienting her after the warehouse's sensory overload. She turned back, screaming Garrett's name. He released his stunned opponent with a final shove and bolted toward Lucy. Shots from the shotgun echoed behind them, chewing into the metal door frame as they lunged outside. Lucy and Garrett burst out into the open air, adrenaline surging. The warehouse's siren faded slightly behind them, but they weren't safe yet. A cluster of bikers stood to the right, near a chain-link fence. Their heads snapped around at the sound of the door banging open. Recognizing Lucy and Garrett as intruders, at least 2 of them raised firearms. Without pausing to think, Lucy dove behind a rusted tractor tire left abandoned in the lot. Garrett, meanwhile, dashed in the opposite direction, drawing the biker's fire away from Lucy. Bullets whizzed past him, kicking up dust and gravel. He slid behind a stack of wooden pallets, panting hard. Lucy heard the ragged edge of his breathing over the chaotic din. Fearless as he appeared, even Garrett wasn't immune to the terror of a close firefight. Amid the gunfire, a figure emerged from the darkness on the far side of the lot. Red. He moved quietly, staying low, but Lucy recognized his silhouette instantly. Relief and apprehension warred within her. At least he's still alive, she thought. But this place is a war zone. She gestured frantically, trying to direct him out of the biker's line of fire. Red nodded, ducking behind an overturned metal drum. "What now?" Garrett shouted over the cacophony. Lucy's mind raced. They still had the advantage of night and the element of surprise. Most of the bikers, fixated on their warehouse operations, hadn't expected a full assault. But every passing second brought more men pouring out to investigate. If they didn't retreat soon, the outnumbered trio would be surrounded. Red offered the best immediate plan, a hasty withdrawal to the tree line. "We've got what we need, footage. Let's get out of here," he hollered, pointing to the wooded area where they'd parked their vehicles. Lucy exchanged a quick look with Garrett, then nodded. The problem, between them and the tree line, lay a wide-open stretch of ground under sporadic but dangerous gunfire. They'd have to move fast and cover each other. Stealing a breath, Lucy signaled Garrett to provide cover. Garrett rose slightly from behind the pallets, squeezed off several shots, and forced the nearest bikers to duck. Lucy seized the moment, sprinting for a half-broken wall that offered partial concealment. Gravel crunched beneath her boots, and her lungs burned with effort. Another burst of gunfire erupted, tearing into the ground behind her, but she remained unscathed. Once in position, Lucy returned fire, letting Garrett and Red dash across another portion of the lot. The plan was a leapfrogging retreat, each taking turns suppressing the enemy while the others advanced. Each exchange of gunfire rattled Lucy, but she pushed the fear down, recalling her grueling training. She wasn't a frightened waitress in these moments. She was a seasoned operative, determined to keep her allies alive. Little by little, they gained ground, edging closer to the tree line. The bikers, uncoordinated and caught off guard, fired wildly. Lucy saw a few of them duck behind vehicles or storage crates, yelling to one another in confusion. She inhaled shakily, praying none of the townsfolk had wandered near this chaos. The last thing she wanted was another innocent victim. Finally, the trio reached a cluster of trees, diving into the shadows. The harsh spotlight of the warehouse security floodlights gave way to the soothing darkness of the woods, where they could vanish. They ran until their lungs burned and the shouts from the warehouse faded into the distance. The canopy of the trees enveloped them in near total darkness, broken only by narrow moonlit patches. Finally, Red signaled them to stop. All three collapsed against tree trunks, gasping for air. Lucy clutched the pistol she'd confiscated, knuckles white, adrenaline still coursing through her veins. Red tapped his camera, relief evident in his eyes. "Got it all on footage," he panted. "Clear images of the operation, faces, crates of illegal weapons, enough to bury them if the sheriff acts." A shaky grin tugged at Lucy's lips. Despite the chaotic shootout, they'd succeeded in their primary mission. She turned to Garrett, checking for injuries. He winced, rubbing his side where the biker had elbowed him. "I'm fine," he said between ragged breaths. "Just bruised." As Lucy stood, the gravity of their situation settled in. The bikers wouldn't just shrug off this attack. They'd be livid, likely mobilizing to find whoever dared breach their stronghold. "We need to move," she thought. "Let's get to our vehicles and clear out," she whispered, glancing at Red. "Then we'll figure out the next steps. We have to get this evidence to the sheriff immediately before the gang has time to relocate or destroy the contraband." They navigated the woods carefully, stifling coughs and groans of pain. Branches snapped underfoot, and every rustle of leaves felt deafening in the aftermath of the firefight. Lucy couldn't shake the image of the bikers scrambling to respond. She pictured them fanning out, shining flashlights into the darkness. If any had night vision gear, they might soon close in. But luck remained on the trio's side. After another few minutes of tense searching, they located their vehicles, hidden beneath dense foliage. The sense of relief was almost overwhelming as they climbed into their respective rides. Lucy started her truck, grimacing at the noise of the engine. It felt like a beacon in the quiet forest. Red slid into the passenger seat, camera clutched protectively. Garrett took his own car, a nondescript sedan parked a short distance away. With a final wave to confirm they were all set, the group rolled onto the old back road, headlights off to avoid drawing attention. Only when they were several miles away did Lucy flick her lights on, exhaling a deep breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The drive toward town felt surreal. Lucy's hands trembled on the steering wheel, the adrenaline crash leaving her muscles jittery. She caught Red watching her, his expression a mixture of concern and weary relief. "You did good back there," he said softly. Lucy managed a tight smile. "You too. Couldn't have done it without Garrett either. That was a close call." She swallowed hard, her throat dry. Memories of past missions flooded back. The rapid retreats, the frantic check-ins, the question always looming. Did we lose anyone? At least this time, they all made it out in one piece. Their first stop, the sheriff's office, though Lucy worried how he might react to a vigilante infiltration. But the clock was ticking, and there was no other way. The town needed protection, and the bikers had escalated too far for a half-measure response. The trio had hard proof, hopefully enough to spur law enforcement into meaningful action, before the gang retaliated on a grand scale. It was close to midnight when Lucy, Red, and Garrett quietly entered the small sheriff's office. The fluorescent lights hummed in the cramped lobby. A startled deputy, clearly not used to late-night visitors, eyed them suspiciously. "Something I can help you with?" he asked, voice cautious. Lucy took the lead. "We need to speak with Sheriff Hopkins. Now, it's urgent." The deputy frowned but recognized Lucy's face from the diner. "He's in the back," he said, stepping aside. "Go on through." In a cluttered office, Sheriff Hopkins sat poring over paperwork, heavy bags under his eyes. He looked up at the unexpected visitors. "Lucy, what are you doing here at this hour, and who—" His voice trailed off, taking in Red's and Garrett's guarded expressions. Lucy wasted no time. She motioned for Red to set the camera on the desk. "We have evidence, hard proof of the biker gang's operation. Guns, contraband, everything. We filmed it tonight." Hopkins blinked, confusion and concern mingling on his features. "Filmed it? Where?" Lucy inhaled, holding his gaze. "Inside their warehouse on the outskirts of town. We infiltrated it. Illegally, I suppose, but we had no choice." A storm of emotions played across the sheriff's face. Shock, alarm, a flash of anger, and finally a dawning realization. "You went in there yourselves?" he asked, tone hushed. "Do you have any idea how dangerous?" Lucy cut him off gently. "We do, but we got out and we brought this." With a trembling hand, Red pressed play on the camera's display. Grainy night footage lit up the small screen. Crates of guns, men wearing scorpion patches, the faint glint of narcotics packages. The sheriff leaned in, jaw clenching. "My God," he muttered. "I knew they were trouble, but this is enough to bring the state troopers, maybe even the feds, down on them. Why didn't you show me this earlier?" He paused, rubbing his temples. "Because you just filmed it tonight, right? And you could have been killed." Lucy's voice softened. "We needed a smoking gun, something that would force a warrant. If we'd tipped them off too soon, they would have disappeared or relocated the evidence." Hopkins nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving the footage. "I can't deny this changes everything," he murmured. "But you've essentially confessed to trespassing, possibly breaking and entering. The judge might frown on that." Red squared his shoulders. "We'll deal with the legal fallout later. Right now, we need to stop them before they retaliate. They know someone was in there. They might guess it's Lucy. She's one of the most outspoken people against them, and the diner is a prime target." The sheriff stood, pacing around his cramped office. Then he plucked a radio from his belt. "Deputy, get in here," he barked. Moments later, the young deputy stepped in. "We've got probable cause for a raid," Hopkins stated, his voice resolute. "Call in all available units and request backup from the State Highway Patrol. Tonight, we're hitting that warehouse. We can't give them time to hide this evidence." Lucy's heart hammered at the sheriff's bold decision. She exchanged a look with Red and Garrett. Was it really happening? Were they about to see the gang taken down in a single strike, all in the span of a night? Hopkins glanced at them, reading their expressions. "I know you have a personal stake in this," he said, "but let us handle it from here. You've done enough." Lucy exhaled, relief mingled with lingering dread. She'd gladly let the professionals take over, assuming the bikers didn't launch a final, desperate counterattack first. An hour later, the normally sleepy sheriff's office buzzed with urgency. Squad cars lined the parking lot, lights swirling silently to avoid alerting the bikers prematurely. Deputies suited up in protective vests and 2 state trooper vehicles arrived, their occupants quietly conferring with the Hopkins. Lucy, Red, and Garrett observed from a corner, all too aware that every plan hinged on speed and stealth. If the gang caught wind of the impending raid, they could scatter like rats, taking their illegal goods elsewhere or digging in for a violent standoff. Hopkins approached the trio. "We're rolling out shortly. I've briefed the troopers on your footage. We'll have enough men to secure the perimeter." He paused, eyes lingering on Lucy. "You 3 should lay low. You've done your part, and we're grateful, but I can't have civilians in the line of fire." Garrett opened his mouth to protest, perhaps wanting to lend his combat experience, but Lucy placed a calming hand on his arm. The sheriff was right. They'd risked enough, and now was the moment for official intervention. Still, Lucy couldn't simply go home and rest. Too many loose ends remained. What if the raid went sideways? What if the bikers decided to strike back elsewhere, like at the diner? Ms. Dixie was still vulnerable, as were countless other residents. She glanced at Red, who gave a slight nod of understanding. "We'll keep watch around town," Lucy suggested to Hopkins, "in case any bikers slip through your perimeter and try something." The sheriff looked hesitant, then acquiesced. "Fine, but stay out of the main operation, understood?" Lucy nodded. Within minutes, the squad cars peeled out, sirens off, heading toward the warehouse in a swift convoy. The tension in the air felt thick enough to slice through. Lucy climbed into her truck with Red, and Garrett followed in his sedan. They drove quietly through the dark streets, windows rolled down to catch any sign of trouble. Distant engine roars, gunshots, anything that might indicate the bikers were on the move. Eventually, Lucy stopped by the diner. The neon sign was off, but she checked the doors and windows, ensuring Ms. Dixie had everything locked tight. Satisfied, she parked across the street where her truck was partially concealed behind a cluster of trees. Red and Garrett pulled up beside her. They stepped out and gathered for a whispered discussion, the moonlight casting sharp shadows on their faces. "Hopefully the raid nails them all," Garrett said, trying to sound optimistic. "But if some slip away, they might blame you for tipping off the cops." Lucy grimaced at the thought. "We've considered that. We'll be ready." She tapped the trunk of her truck, which contained her hidden gear. Red placed a hand on Lucy's shoulder. "You sure about this? If they do come here, it might not be just a handful. It could be the whole gang, desperate and angry." Lucy's expression hardened. "Let them try. We're not looking for a fight, but we won't run either." They spent the next hour in near silent vigil. Occasionally, a local driver passed by, likely baffled to see two cars parked outside the closed diner so late. Lucy's muscles ached from the tension, but she forced herself to remain alert. Thoughts flitted back to her Delta Force days, endless nights on guard, waiting for the enemy's next move. She'd left that life for peace, yet here she was again, safeguarding a community that didn't even know the extent of her abilities. "Funny how fate works," she mused grimly. Then it happened, the distant crackle of gunfire, popping like distant fireworks in the direction of the warehouse. Lucy's heart lurched. The raid's on. She glanced at Red and Garrett, both of whom tensed, listening intently. The faint echo of shouting and more shots carried across the still night. Whatever was unfolding, it sounded intense, and the outcome would determine the immediate future of the town they all sought to protect. For a few agonizing minutes, Lucy and her companions could only guess what was happening at the warehouse. The intermittent crack of gunfire echoed, followed by eerie silence, then another volley. Lucy's mind conjured 100 possibilities. Maybe the sheriff's men had cornered the bikers, or perhaps the gang had dug in, turning the place into a fortress. Red's jaw flexed as he gripped the door frame of Lucy's truck, ready to spring into action if needed. Garrett paced on the grass, occasionally peering down the road as though expecting a convoy of bikers any second. Then came the roar of motorcycles, a group of them approaching fast from the direction of the highway. Lucy's pulse kicked up. They exchanged alarmed looks, rushing to douse any interior lights. Within moments, a column of bikes thundered past, heading straight into town. Lucy counted at least 4 riders, all wearing scorpion patches. So some must have escaped the raid, or were never at the warehouse to begin with, she thought grimly. Their path led directly toward the diner district. Dixie's Haven might be their target, Garrett whispered, recalling how the gang had been fixated on extorting the place. Lucy felt a wave of anger. "Not on our watch." She started her engine, careful not to switch on the headlights, and followed the bikers at a discreet distance. Red joined her in the passenger seat, rifle in hand. Garrett trailed behind in his sedan, skillfully keeping his headlights off to remain unseen. The riders didn't slow until they reached the diner's block, then parked haphazardly in front. Lucy halted a short distance away, killing the engine. Through the gloom, she saw the bikers dismount, one of them limping slightly. He gripped a bandage on his arm, a sign he might have been injured in the raid. Another shouted to the group, voice taut with fury, "We'll torch this place if we have to. That waitress and the old lady are the reason the cops came down on us." Lucy clenched her fists on the steering wheel. They'd guessed right. The gang blamed her and Ms. Dixie. Her fear sharpened into a steely resolve. She turned to Red. We have to stop them now before they break in or set fire. Red nodded, checking the safety on his rifle. Garrett's voice crackled over a small walkie-talkie Red had given him earlier. I'll flank from the side, he said. You two go straight on. Let's catch them by surprise. Lucy didn't love the idea of splitting up, but time was critical. They had to prevent destruction or worse, a hostage situation, if Ms. Dixie had decided to return for any reason. Stepping out of the truck, Lucy moved low across the pavement, Red at her side. Her heart hammered, each beat fueling her sense of duty. She couldn't let these men terrorize the diner that had given her a second chance at a peaceful life. Spotting the four bikers near the entrance, Lucy paused behind a parked car. They appeared to be searching for a way inside, one smashing his fist against the locked glass door. On cue, a figure emerged from the alley. Garrett. He aimed a pistol at the nearest biker, barking, "Drop your weapons!" Startled, the men spun around. Lucy and Red seized the moment, stepping out from cover with their guns raised. Lucy's voice rang out, firm and unyielding. It's over! Get on the ground, now! The bikers froze, caught off guard by the sudden ambush. Their eyes darted between Garrett's pistol and the weapons brandished by Lucy and Red. One of them, a grizzled man with a fresh bullet graze on his forearm, glowered defiantly, but his trembling hands betrayed uncertainty. Another growled, "You're making a big mistake," spitting onto the sidewalk as if to punctuate his threat. Lucy's grip on her pistol never wavered. The mistake was thinking you could terrorize this town without consequences. For a tense moment, it seemed like they might comply. Then the biker with the injured arm lunged for his waistband. Lucy fired a single shot at the ground near his feet, sending sparks off the pavement. "Try that again, and you'll regret it," she warned, her voice ice cold. The man froze, sweat beading on his forehead. He knows I'm serious, Lucy thought. Good. Red shifted, covering another biker who had a hand creeping toward a concealed blade. Don't, he said, lethal calm in his tone. The biker withdrew his hand, muttering curses under his breath. Garrett advanced cautiously, forcing them to back away from the diner's entrance. He kicked aside a chain and padlock one of the bikers had presumably intended to use. Face down, hands behind your heads, Garrett ordered. Slowly, reluctantly, the men complied, dropping to their knees on the cracked pavement. Their eyes flashed with hatred, but none dared move further. Lucy exhaled, relief mingling with lingering tension. They're subdued, she told herself, scanning for any sign of additional threats. The distant sirens of approaching police vehicles finally grew audible. She called in a tip to dispatch moments earlier, just after leaving the station. The cavalry was arriving, presumably after hearing about the conflict near the diner. Within minutes, squad cars screeched to a halt, red and blue lights painting the storefront in neon chaos. Sheriff Hopkins himself leaped out, weapon drawn. He took in the sight of Lucy, Red, and Garrett holding the bikers at gunpoint. Everyone stand down, he shouted. Lucy and her companions cautiously lowered their weapons as deputies swarmed, handcuffing the would-be arsonists and dragging them upright. The bikers hurled vile epithets, promising retribution, but Hopkins barked at them to shut up, reading them their rights with clip-out efficiency. In the swirl of activity, Lucy let out a shaky breath. Her limbs felt heavy, the adrenaline ebbing away, replaced by sheer exhaustion. She glanced at Garrett, who wiped sweat from his brow, and Red, who locked eyes with her, offering a small nod of solidarity. We did it, Lucy thought, though it felt surreal to celebrate in a street littered with broken glass and tension. If the raid at the warehouse was successful, this might be the final blow to the Scorpion Gang's reign of terror. A short while later, Hopkins approached them, holstering his gun. We've secured the warehouse, he informed, voice strained but triumphant. They put up a fight, some injuries on both sides, but we took them down, found the contraband, just like you showed me. The rest of these punks must have tried to flee or cause a distraction. His gaze swept over the group, a mixture of gratitude and admonishment. You three took a hell of a risk tonight. Technically, I should be reading you a lecture for vigilantism. Red shrugged and Lucy offered a wry smile. Garrett simply remained silent, letting his actions speak for him. Hopkins sighed, then managed a half smile. But you also saved lives and property. This town owes you. Just Maybe consult with us before pulling another stunt like this." Lucy nodded, her mind already blank with fatigue. "We'll do our best," she promised, fully aware that sometimes the line between law and necessity blurred when communities were under siege. Tonight, at least, they'd stood firm against intimidation. Tomorrow, the town could wake up to the news that the biker gang was finished, for good. In the days following the raid, a cautious optimism settled over the town. The sheriff's office held the confiscated contraband as evidence, and charges were filed against multiple gang members for weapons possession, drug trafficking, assault, and attempted arson. Word spread quickly that the Scorpion Patch bikers were either behind bars or on the run, reducing the community's fear to a lingering, manageable concern. It would take time for everyone to truly feel safe again, but the immediate threat had passed. At Dixie's Haven, Miss Dixie hung a new sign out front, a simple message: "Thank you, Lucy." Patrons who came in for coffee and pie soon learned bits of the story, how Lucy, a humble waitress, had played a crucial role in gathering evidence. Townsfolk didn't know the full extent, that Lucy was a former Delta Force operative, or the details of her daring infiltration. Lucy was fine with that. She preferred the quiet life, content to let the rumor mill spin vague tales of her bravery. Raymond, the cook, beamed with pride whenever Lucy was around. "We're going to have ourselves a real celebration soon," he promised, flipping pancakes with renewed vigor. "None of those Scorpion hoodlums will dare set foot in here again." Miss Dixie, for her part, insisted Lucy take a paid week off to rest, but Lucy gently declined. She needed the normalcy of her routine, scrubbing counters, pouring coffee, greeting regulars by name. In the aftermath of violence, small, ordinary tasks brought her a sense of grounding. Meanwhile, Red planned to stick around town for a bit longer, at least until the legal process was firmly in motion. He quietly offered his expertise to the sheriff's office, helping analyze the seized contraband for intel on larger criminal networks. Lucy suspected he'd be off to the next adventure soon enough, though. He'd never been one to stay in one place too long. Before parting ways, he pulled Lucy aside outside the diner. "You did good," he said, placing a hand on her shoulder. "If you ever need help again—" She smiled, eyes misty with gratitude. "Same goes for you." As for Garrett, he found a surprising sense of home in the small town. Rumors hinted he might apply for a deputy position or consider a job at one of the local ranches. In a private moment, he confided to Lucy that he'd been drifting for years after leaving the service, searching for a place where his skills could do good. "Maybe this is it," he said, "though I didn't exactly plan on a biker gang welcoming committee." Lucy laughed softly, thinking how life had an odd way of turning chance encounters into life-changing events. One evening, as the sun set in fiery brilliance over the flat Texan plains, Lucy stepped onto the diner's porch, inhaling the warm air. The neon sign hummed quietly overhead, a subtle reminder of life's persistent rhythms. She let her gaze wander to the open road leading into town. So much had happened in such a short time. Violence, fear, and heroism interwoven. Yet the diner stood unscathed, and townsfolk gathered inside, chatting about weather forecasts and cattle prices once again. Lucy felt a wave of relief and quiet satisfaction. She might not ever fully escape her past, but for now, she'd found her place. Bikers or no bikers, this is home, she thought, stepping back inside to greet a customer. And with that simple act, the door jingling behind her, she embraced a future where ordinary days could still hold extraordinary possibilities. From my own perspective, this story beautifully shows how courage and camaraderie can triumph over intimidation. Lucy's background as a retired Delta Force operative proves that true strength often lies hidden beneath an unassuming exterior. By uniting with her steadfast allies, she not only dismantles a dangerous biker gang, but also renews a sense of hope within a frightened town. The final victory isn't just about bringing criminals to justice. It's about empowering a community to stand strong against anyone who dares to threaten their peace. Thank you for joining us on this thrilling ride. Your engagement and enthusiasm fuel our storytelling passion. If you enjoyed this adventure, please feel free to comment below with your thoughts, theories, or favorite moments. Let's keep the conversation going and continue exploring more incredible narratives together.